Want to help poor children? Give their caregivers cash. All right, let's see what this is all about. During the holiday season, we are all reminded to be grateful for all the good things in our lives. It should also be a time to think about how many of our fellow Americans are far less fortunate than we are. The level of inequality in the U.S. is far above that in other rich countries. The poorest 10% of Americans get a mere 1.6% of total cash income, own earnings and government transfers included. In comparison, France and Sweden's poor receive more than twice as much. Even more unfortunate is the fact that children are most likely to be poor. When we add in the opioid epidemic, some of these children also end up without a family. They are orphaned or placed in foster care. Yet we are not powerless. Research shows that something can be done. Public programs are particularly cost-effective when aimed at the most disadvantaged children, with returns on investment as high as 13%. You know, because heaven forbid we do something just to be charitable. Heaven forbid we do that. When children must be placed in foster care because parents can no longer take care of them, the burden often falls on kin. Typically, these family members are not in a very strong economic situation themselves. Yet the foster care system pressures these family members to take in their relatives, often without giving them much support. Between 2012 and 2016, 44 states saw increased foster care placements with kin. In 2016, 23 of those states reported that more than half of the foster youth placed with caregivers received no payments from the state foster care system. Simply put, relative caregivers are getting shortchanged as compared to non-relative foster parents. All right, okay, so what is the meat here? Okay, one way to give money to poor families is through a universal basic income, where each adult and child receives the same sum of money, no questions asked. A key advantage to such a system is that no one falls through the cracks, since there is no need to prove eligibility through a long and arduous process. There is also reason why such a system is more effective, saving on administrative costs, as pointed out by libertarian economist Milton Friedman. Friedman was a lover of freedom, and the freedom for people to spend the money however they see fit and not be controlled by government was an appealing aspect of a universal cash payment, but will freedom be abused? Okay. In reality, when universal cash payments are made with no strings attached, drug abuse decreases and mental health improves. This is what we learned from the experience of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, who receive regular payments from the casino operated on their reservation. Okay. So, a couple things. First of all, I don't. If we actually want to do something to help poor people, I don't really care whether it has the stamp of approval from a libertarian economist or not. Second of all, that's a right-wing straw man to say, well, what if they just abuse the money? That's such a lazy right-wing straw man that I think really came to prominence during the drug war in the 80s and 90s. And it's just a hateful aside that has no place. Well, they'll just don't help out a poor person. They'll just use it for booze. You don't know anything about that person. What if they just abuse? We should cut welfare because they just abuse it. And I remember when that was really prevalent. I remember teachers teaching me that in school. I remember when I was in grade school and we were taught, not by all of our teachers, but by some. I had a teacher who was a very awful teacher, the worst teacher I've ever had in my life. And she told us this story, and it was meant to demonize welfare, because this was around the time that, you know, Bill Clinton had cut welfare and stuff like that. Welfare was very demonized by all sides of the aisle in our corporate media. I, of course, wasn't totally cognizant of all that because I was too young. I wasn't paying attention to the news or politics yet. But I remember while all this was going on and welfare was demonized, our teacher told us a story. And this was the teacher that was off. Fortunately, she only taught me computer class, which was a joke in and of itself because none of our computers were even made in the decade we were living in. But she told us that she told us that she was at a grocery store. It's so sad I remember this. This is such a... I only have so much short-term memory, and it really sucks that this is being occupied in it. She told us that she was in line at a grocery store, and in front of her in line was a woman who was buying a lot of cat food. And when she went to pay for the cat food, she had a bunch of food stamps. And that our teacher then said, "Wow, you must have a lot of cats." And the woman, I guess, scoffed at her, apparently. And our teacher told us this story as an excuse to demonize welfare. And basically say this woman has too many cats, I guess, was what she was getting at. First of all, what I know about this teacher, I doubt that story's even true. I have a feeling it didn't even happen. But even if it did, you know nothing about this woman. You have no idea. Maybe she really has to budget because she lives on assistance, so she has to plan accordingly. So she buys, like, she kind of has one priority at a time, and that particular day was when she was looking after her pets. So she says, "I need to get all my cat food for the month." Like, you have no freaking idea. You have no idea. Maybe that's all she's going to have for the next few months for her cats. Like, you have no idea her situation or why she was buying that particular amount at that particular time. So, my point is dumb straw men asides, like the one I just described, that teacher from my grade school who had no business teaching children. You want to hear, but before I move on from that, you want to hear a couple other things this teacher said. This teacher in a school full of children, she also told us that Rosa Parks, this is something she said. This is something a teacher in my grade school in the 90s said to a classroom full of students. Rosa Parks, the teacher said this, Rosa Parks didn't do anything except get kicked off of a bus, and Martin Luther King didn't do anything other than get himself shot. This is something a teacher said in a classroom full of students in my grade school. There were black students in the class too. Not that even if there wouldn't have been, that's still like a beyond ridiculous thing to say. She said this in a classroom. Sorry, I'm playing it in my head and I'm remembering it, and I'm like, oh, what an awful, awful person. I don't even know. What a terrible human being she was. I'm sorry. I just, what a terrible, terrible human being. What a gross thing to say. So anyway, and one of her other drops of wisdom was when she said, she told us a story about how welfare's terrible because of this woman who was buying cat food. These are the gems that I was taught. And I've had some amazing teachers at that same school too, so I'm not gonna pick, but this was certainly not one of them. So my point is, getting back to the big picture, this person, or this idea that, well, are they going to abuse the money, is a dumb right-wing aside. Now, bringing it back to UBI, Universal Basic Income. Again, I'm not against a UBI. However, we need to also focus on a jobs guarantee. We can do both. And that UBI has to come with very, very significant rent protections for renters. Otherwise, the UBI will be meaningless. It won't matter. So you need all those things to go hand in hand with it. So, but I'm all about, if there was some kind of system to provide more for those in need, of course I'm all about it. So I don't know if this perspective, I'm not familiar with this institute, but I do know that, are we worried they're going to misuse the funds? That's usually a right-wing talking point. Now, if Now, as far as people trying to game the system in adopting children and then neglecting them, I understand the need for some concern there. You do hear about that. It's not a very common thing to my knowledge, but it does happen. We can't say it's never happened. It has. But, again, that doesn't justify the right-wing strawman that has been dominant since the 80s and 90s. And, bringing it back to the holiday season, because that was mentioned in this article too, it's good to be charitable and just be mindful of where you're contributing. There's a lot of organizations out there that seem good on the surface, and then you look into what they really do, where that money really goes, and they're not the greatest. Salvation Army, Susan G. Komen. I wouldn't recommend giving any money to them. I would recommend giving money directly to community causes, directly to different organizations that are giving to your community. If you're in the LA area, the She Does movement is a good place. We had Mel Telekarabne on the show who talked about what he's doing for homeless women in the Los Angeles area. Or just straight up given directly to, the poor people in your community. I have a big homeless population where I live, and I see them everywhere. And, I've thought one of the things I'm going to try to do, and in fact, I will be going to Pittsburgh this weekend for my grandmother's funeral. I was going to try to gather a bunch of winter clothes that my family doesn't need, that I don't need, and I was going to just kind of set it out at the homeless, I guess camp would be a word for it, and I was just going to kind of set it out for anyone who needs it, because it does get cold in Southern California at night. It really does. And so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna get, because I don't have any winter clothes at my apartment, because I don't need them. Like, the few things I do have are things I actually use. I have like one coat and one hat. That's all I have. I don't have, you don't need it. But I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I know there's a lot of winter stuff somewhere that my parents don't need, that I don't need. So I was gonna bring it to Southern California, set it out for the homeless. Doing stuff like that, I think, is a good way to go. Because, a lot of these organizations, they aren't really good charities. And we should do more segments on that as the holiday season moves forward, about stuff that these organizations really do, and how most of their money doesn't actually go towards helping people. It's not every organization, but, we named two. Salvation Army, Susan G. Komen. Those are definitely two. And we should do future segments looking into more. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your